Story 1. The Caretaker's Night. They said time stood still inside the Frost Hollow Lodge. But I heard it tick. 7 pendulum clocks, synchronized like a heartbeat, struck 1:13 a.m. every night. The strange part? Only one of them was ever wound. I was the new caretaker, filling in after the previous guy disappeared without even grabbing his last paycheck. Built in 1892 near Black Balsam Knob, the place was frozen in another century. Brass sconces, velvet curtains faded by time, and a long hallway lined with grandfather clocks, all different in make but identical in their eerie tick. The air always smelled like old pine and pipe smoke, even though no one had lit a fire in decades. I took the job because it was quiet, paid cash, and gave me a break from the city after a bad breakup. First 2 nights? Nothing. But on the 3rd, I heard all 7 clocks chime in unison at 1:13 a.m. Not just bong, each gave a whining moan, like the air was sucked through them. It chilled my back, but I figured maybe they had a shared spring system or something old-fashioned like that. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling someone was watching from the corner of the hallway where the light bulb always flickered. By night 5, I started locking my bedroom door. On night 6, the locks clicked open on their own. I bolted upright, flashlight trembling in my hand, and the air smelled like iron and wet leaves. Footsteps creaked across the hallway, slow and heavy. But when I opened the door, no one was there. Except all 7 clocks had swung their pendulums into sync, even though I'd removed the weights from 3 of them that morning. I checked the old caretaker's logbook. The last entry, in red ink. Don't let them strike. It's not just time that moves. That night, I unplugged the working clock. At 1:12, every other clock in the house began ticking faster. At exactly 1:13, all 7 let out a deep gong that made the walls vibrate. The curtains blew inward, though no window was open. A shape formed. Tall, thin, eyes like dials, and fingers that swung like metronomes. It whispered in reverse speech. I didn't sleep. I didn't even pack. I ran barefoot into the night, didn't stop until I reached a ranger station. They sent someone to check. The clocks were all gone. Just 7 empty spaces on the wall. The next caretaker never lasted more than 2 nights. And every time I close my eyes at 1:13 a.m., I hear the ticking start up again, inside my ears, behind my ribs. Like something is waiting. Story 2, The Watchmaker's Son. There's a trail near Cello Knob that locals call Dead Time Path. Not marked on any map. It leads to a forgotten hunting lodge about an hour in from the ridge. That's where I found the clocks. 7 massive pendulum clocks, all standing in a semicircle, untouched by moss, perfectly preserved. I wasn't there to hike. I was trying to piece together the last months of my father's life. He was a reclusive watchmaker from Asheville who went missing in 1987. Mom said he'd become obsessed with time loops and the idea that some places had their own rules. He kept a journal filled with sketches of gears and odd coordinates. His last entry was a map leading me here. As I stepped into the lodge, my phone lost signal, and my digital watch froze at 1:12 a.m., even though it was mid-afternoon. The air got thick, like walking through syrup, and every sound seemed muffled. I could hear the steady tick of pendulums behind the walls, even though the lodge was empty except for one small leather-bound notebook. My father's initials were etched into the cover. Inside, just one line repeated, "Don't let them all strike." The loop feeds on attention. That night, I stayed. I shouldn't have. The clocks began chiming again, one at a time, then together. At exactly 1:13 a.m., every light in the lodge turned on, even the ones without bulbs. Shadows stretched upward. I saw my father, aged but alive, standing between the clocks. His eyes were gray, unmoving, and his lips whispered something I couldn't hear over the ticking. Then suddenly, all 7 clocks struck once, and everything blinked black. When I woke, it was broad daylight. My camera was gone, my notebook too. But now I dream of ticking, loud and erratic. And each morning I wake up with a different timestamp carved faintly into my wrist. Last week it said 1:13. This morning, 1:12. I don't know what happens when it reaches 0. But I can feel time cracking around me like thin ice, second by second. And sometimes I swear I hear my father working in the next room, winding something that never runs out. Story 3, The Lodge of Echoing Steps. They told us to never stay in the Blackthorn Lodge past midnight. The old-timers in Burnsville warned me and my cousin Eli that the place counts your footsteps, and if the clocks chime while you're still walking, well, it ain't your feet moving anymore. We laughed it off. We were 22, dumb and full of bourbon from the general store. The lodge was a relic, shoved against a granite cliffside, logs dried gray, roof missing half its shingles. But inside it was spotless. No cobwebs, no dust. A table was set like someone expected us. A single candle was lit at the center. And, of course, those 7 pendulum clocks, spread across the walls like sentinels, each marked with a bronze deer's skull where the 12 should be. Eli dared me to stay until 1:13. He even bet me a month's rent, easy money. But as the minutes passed, we started to feel followed. The kind of creeping presence where the silence breathes louder than your own heartbeat. I remember pacing the main room, counting floorboards to stay calm. That's when I heard it, my footsteps. But then a second pair behind me, matching me exactly. I spun around. Eli was still in the chair, pale, eyes wide. "Don't move," he whispered. "It's mimicking you." I stood still. So did the sound. We tried to leave. The door wouldn't budge. The candle dimmed. Then, chime. The first clock rang out. Then another. At 5 chimes in, I saw a version of myself step out from the shadows. Same shirt, same scar on the chin, but eyes completely black. I backed into Eli. He shoved me toward the kitchen. As the final clock chimed at 1:13, the lodge shook and the double lunged at me. Eli swung a chair at it. I don't know what happened next. I woke up in my truck parked outside the ranger station, barefoot, covered in pine needles, Eli gone. No one ever found him. But 2 months later, I got a package with no return address. Inside was a single photo taken from above, as if someone was on the ceiling. It showed Eli and me, seated at the lodge's dinner table, the candle flickering. But here's the thing. There were 3 shadows on the floor, and mine was looking the wrong way. Story 4, The Clockmaker's Room. It was supposed to be a weekend of restoration. My fiancée, Georgia, had inherited an abandoned lodge near Damascus, Virginia, an old family property no one had touched in decades. She was an artist obsessed with antiques and had plans to turn the place into an Airbnb. The building was perched on an overlook called Widow's Cradle, and from the outside, it looked like it hadn't seen a soul since the Great Depression. But what caught our attention on arrival were the 7 pendulum clocks lining the hallways. Massive, oaken, and grotesquely carved. Each had a hand-painted number 13 instead of a 12. And behind the pendulums were odd mirrored inlays that seemed deeper than their frames. One clock sat locked inside a narrow bedroom. Georgia called it the clockmaker's room. She claimed her great-uncle died in there, mid-tune, while crafting his final clock. She found a dusty key hidden inside a music box. That night, at exactly 1:13 a.m., the lodge began to tick, not just the clocks, but the walls, the floors, the fireplace stones, like they were responding. I awoke to Georgia standing in the hallway, staring into one of the mirrored clock faces, whispering to it. I yanked her back. She looked at me like I'd interrupted a conversation. "He said it's almost time," she mumbled. That morning, she insisted we open the locked room. Inside, there were blueprints, hand-drawn schematics for clocks, each marked with a symbol I later learned was a variation of the ancient sigil for reversal. On the floor lay a shattered 8th clock, its mirrored face cracked in the center. That night, she went missing. I woke to find every clock's hands spinning backwards, ticking in reverse. I followed the sound to the room. She was gone. But her reflection stood in the mirror of the shattered clock, motionless. Then, without warning, the glass reformed before my eyes, trapping her image inside. The clock stopped at 1:13. I've returned each year since, same day, same time, and waited. Sometimes I swear I see her blink. Continue. Story 5. The Blue Candle Ritual. They said the old lodge near Laurel Creek used to be a chapel before the flood of 1916 swallowed the valley and buried everything beneath 30 feet of Appalachian mud and silence. I'm a spiritualist. Not the kind that sells crystals online, but the kind who believes certain places still echo the ceremonies once performed there. My partner, Tessa, and I arrived in early October to investigate the rumors of time lapses inside a particular room on the 2nd floor. One where every pendulum clock apparently struck 1:13 at the same time, no matter the hour. We planned a simple ritual. Light a blue candle, say the ancestral chant passed down through Tessa's grandmother, and observe. We never expected the clocks to respond. It started with the wind. Not outside, but from the fireplace. The flame of the blue candle flickered sideways against gravity. Tessa's voice trembled on the last word of the chant. That's when the ticking began. Not rhythmic, but overlapping, as if layered recordings of clocks played over one another. I turned toward the hallway. The 7 grandfather clocks stood open, their mirrored faces glowing faintly. At 1:13, all at once, they struck, not with chimes, but with hollow, metallic gasps, like breath from the lungs of a dying man. Tessa screamed. The candle had gone out. The mirrors now showed us standing beside someone else. A third figure, cloaked in deep blue with skin like burned bark, stood in the reflection, reaching toward Tessa. I grabbed her, but her eyes had rolled back. She whispered, "Don't blow the candle again. It watches the flame." I relit it with my lighter. Instantly, the presence vanished from the mirror. The ticking stopped. Tessa collapsed, and the clocks reset to midnight. She hasn't spoken since, but sometimes, when I pass a mirror, I see her lips moving, whispering in reverse. Story 6. The Elkbone Timekeeper. I was raised in Mars Hill, a quiet little town that doesn't make the map unless someone from Asheville is feeling generous. My grandfather used to hunt the Big Ivy Woods and told tales of a lodge deeper than any marked trail. A place once used by a local cult who carved their clocks from elk bone and wore their time around their necks. When I turned 30 and started losing chunks of my memory, hours gone without reason, I returned home, hoping to clear my head. That's when I found the photo. Tucked in a Civil War Bible dated 1877, there it was. The exact same lodge my grandfather described. 7 pendulum clocks standing like sentries behind the altar, all frozen at 1:13. My fingers went cold. I shouldn't have gone searching, but the obsession had burrowed too deep. After 3 days in Big Ivy, I found it. The roof had caved in, but the 7 clocks stood untouched, towering over what used to be pews, now covered in lichen. A strange ticking began the moment I crossed the threshold. I looked at my watch. 1:07. I swear the hands moved faster. I blinked, and it was 1:09. The clock's pendulum started to swing in unison, one swing per second. A voice, dry and mechanical, whispered behind me, "Time for you too." I turned. Nothing. I backed toward the door, but each step dragged like molasses. When the clock struck 1:13, I blacked out. I woke up back in my tent, but three things were wrong. My hair had gone gray, my clothes were stiff with age, and my voice sounded like my grandfather's. I fled the forest, but every night at 1:13, I hear the ticking return, and sometimes the whisper follows. You kept the time. Now time keeps you. I'm. Story 7, The Horologist's Guestbook. Most of the lodge was dust and mouse trails when I inherited it from my uncle, a man who spent his twilight years restoring clocks and collecting whispers. Everyone in Boone called him the horologist, though no one ever saw him sell a single piece. The deed came with a single line, handwritten in red ink, "Never wind the 7th." That was it. 7 grandfather clocks stood perfectly aligned along the western wall of the lodge. One of them, the last, had no hands. Its pendulum was carved from some dark red wood, and it didn't swing like the others. I was a practical man, recently divorced and in desperate need of a distraction. So I ignored the warning. Over the course of a week, I restored each of the 6 functional clocks to perfect working order. They chimed beautifully, except at 1:13 a.m. Then they didn't chime. They screamed. That's the only word I can use. It was a mechanical, grinding scream that felt like it turned the air solid. Then one night, I made the mistake. I dusted the 7th clock, found a tiny keyhole behind the wood-carved base, and out of sheer defiance, wound it. It didn't tick. It throbbed. The pendulum began to move, not side to side, but in a lazy, deliberate circle. That night at 1:13, all 7 clocks struck at once. But instead of chimes, I heard voices. A girl sobbing, a man yelling, an infant screaming like it had never seen light. Shadows bled from under the clock bases, spreading toward the center of the lodge, forming shapes that knelt, reached, and beckoned. I ran. I left everything. A week later, I returned with a sheriff and 2 contractors. The lodge was still there, but none of the clocks were. In their place stood 7 wooden statues, each carved in perfect likeness to people from Boone who had gone missing over the years, including my uncle. And in the middle, where the 7th clock once stood, was a guest book. I was the last to sign it.